What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of China Update. My name is Tony. It's been a busy week. Let's jump in. On Monday, the Beijing-based National Bureau of Statistics released official economic data for the month of April. According to the official data released by the Bureau, China's retail sales, a typical proxy for consumption used by some economists, were up month on month by 0.32%, or 3.9% on an annualized basis. Industrial production was up month on month by 0.52% or 6.4% on an annualized basis. While these numbers in of themselves were disappointing to some, the more concerning point here is that production growth continues to outpace consumption by a large margin, which means the economy is still not being rebalanced towards consumption or being a consumption-led economy as promised by officials for at least 12 months now. Officials do seem aware of this, however, with a recent Politburo meeting concluding, quote, "The current economic recovery is uneven and the foundation is not yet solid," end quote. Premier Li Keqiang is particularly concerned about household income and employment, expressing at a recent state council meeting, quote, "Employment pressure remains significant and is not to be underestimated. For a big country as China, with 1.4 billion people, the government must always put employment high on its agenda and maintain the consistency and sustainability of the job policy," end quote. This week, a People's Republic of China lander carrying a rover successfully touched down on the planet Mars. This is the first time China has landed a spacecraft on another planet. The rover will begin an initial 90-day mission to explore and analyze the local area, climate, magnetic field, and subsurface. It was such a big event for the Chinese here that the General Secretary made a few words, expressing, quote, "The landing left a Chinese mark on Mars for the first time. It is another landmark progress in China's space industry development. Thanks to your courage in the face of challenges and the pursuit of excellence, China is now among the leading countries in planetary exploration. The country and people always remember your outstanding achievements," end quote. And with Xi Jinping here, we move to the quote of the week. Quote, "Red rivers and mountains forged in blood. Red genes pass from generation to generation. Why is the CPC capable? Why does Marxism work? And why is socialism with Chinese characteristics good? The answers to these questions are embedded in our party's century-long struggle, and we need to learn and understand from the party's glorious achievements, arduous history, historical experience, and fine traditions over and over again. One of the keys lies in the word red. In the new journey of building a modern socialist country using red resources, passing on red genes, and continuing the red bloodline, the Chinese communists in the new era will be able to write a magnificent chapter and forge a red monument that will never fade," end quote. As we read this, we should give pause perhaps at the use of this red here over and over again. It has two symbols here, this red. The first is communism, obviously, socialism, or socialism with Chinese characteristics. The other is the shredding of blood. We see this theme as well. So when Xi here calls for forging a red monument, one must wonder, I guess, which of these two reds he means. At this point, guys, if you're enjoying the video, I'm a new YouTuber, so if you enjoy the content, it's a massive help if you hit that like button. For those who are watching for the first time, if you enjoy this sort of update, this sort of China macro development every week, maybe consider subscribing. And also, at this point, a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys rock. Thank you so much for your continued support throughout this time. Cheers. Okay, back to the updates. A recent Rhodium Group report on global CO2 or carbon emissions found that for the first time, China's annual emissions exceeded those of all developed countries combined. The report expressed, quote, "China's emissions were less than a quarter of developed countries' emissions in 1990, but over the past 3 decades have more than tripled, reaching over 14 gigatons of CO2 equivalent in 2019. In 2019, China's per capita emissions reached 10.1 tons, nearly tripling over the past 2 decades. This comes in just below average levels across the OECD bloc in 2019, but still significantly lower than the US, which has the highest per capita emissions in the world at 17.6 tons per capita. While final global data for 2020 is not yet available, we expect China's per capita emissions exceeded the OECD average in 2020. So with that, let's look at 2020. Also this week, the Helsinki-based Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air published a report which found that over the last 12 months, total CO2 emissions in China exceeded pre-pandemic levels by 7%, setting the fastest rate of growth since 2012 in the PRC. Around 70% of the CO2 surge in the first quarter was due to increased consumption of coal, according to the report. Recently, the American Chamber of Commerce published its annual white paper on the state of US business in China. Now, it's important that we follow these sort of reports because US business, of course, has a large and profound effect often on policy making in Washington. The report this year expressed that, quote, a majority of our members reported US-China bilateral tensions had become the top challenge to doing business in China, end quote. It went on to say that AmCham, the American Chamber of Commerce in China, acknowledges that the US-China relationship is undergoing a fundamental recalibration and acknowledges the legitimate rights of all countries to define and protect their national security, but that it remains opposed to any effort to outright decouple the US-China relationship. Quote, in order to be globally competitive, American producers and service providers must be able to compete in the China market on a level playing field. Nevertheless, extensive market access barriers, protectionism, an opaque regulatory system, and discriminatory enforcement continue to hinder the operations of US businesses in China today. End quote. The document was also critical of government-coordinated consumer boycotts of US products to be replaced with domestic alternatives. Now, while we're on this topic, AmCham Hong Kong, which is a separate organization, this is the US Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong, conducted a survey of its members' attitudes towards leaving Hong Kong due to the passing of the national security law in 2020. The AmCham Hong Kong survey, to which 325 or 24% of its members responded in early May, showed 42% of them had considered leaving or planned to leave Hong Kong. Of those planning to move out, 3% said they intended to do so immediately, 10% said before the end of the summer, and 15% before the end of the year, while 48% said that they would move within 3 to 5 years. About 62% of those looking to leave ticked, quote, national security law makes me uncomfortable, end quote, as one of the reasons behind the decision to leave the territory. This week, the European Parliament voted to freeze consideration of the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, a huge investment and trade deal agreement between the PRC and the EU, which was signed in late 2020 between Xi and major European leaders, but has still not been ratified in the European Parliament. Now, the vote to freeze the legislation or the ratification of this agreement passed with a landslide of 599 votes in favor, 30 votes against. During a press conference on Thursday, the EU Trade Commissioner expressed, quote, we cannot see this process of ratification outside of the broader context of EU-China relations. The fact that China has introduced retaliatory sanctions, including against members of the European Parliament, is certainly not a conducive environment for working towards the ratification of the deal, end quote. Now, this is just a freeze. It is not an outright rejection of the agreement. The ball is now in China's court, and we will be following the developments here. And last up, this week the central government in Beijing published new guidelines to combat a very old and stubborn issue, that of organized gang activity at the quote-unquote grassroots levels. Deep systemic criminal corruption, working with local organized crime, is one of China's most serious social problems, which I believe is underappreciated by many urban citizens in Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities, as this issue is more acute in rural townships, in rural areas, and in poorer urban centers, these poorer, lower tier cities in China. The major developed cities are typically cleaner and function better, comparatively speaking. According to state-run Xinhua media, the guidelines urge, quote, the establishment and improvement of mechanisms in various aspects, including prevention and regulation, rewards for tip-offs, law-based punishment and supervision, end quote. I'm doubtful that these new guidelines will do much to fix this deeply entrenched issue, but I think if we look at the wording that was in these guidelines, we can really get a sense of how much of a social ill higher officials in Beijing view this issue as. Quote, from the history of the struggle against these evil forces since the reform and opening up, we must take local governance as fundamental policy and continue to vigorously rectify industrial and rural areas so that the evil forces have nowhere to take root. Special rectification should be carried out continuously. Regular rolling investigations should be maintained. Special rectification should be carried out in industries with more chaos and problems such as excessive management of traditional industries, illegal monopolies, illegal and disgusting growth of adult entertainment industries, etc. should be effectively prevented. We should enhance people's ability to prevent illegal crimes by evil forces. To be frank, as economic slowdown continues and as wealth and income disparities continue to worsen from what is already some of the worst levels in the world, worse than places like Brazil, I foresee that these issues that we're talking about here in these poorer parts of the country, these lower tier cities, these rural townships, are probably likely going to get worse and not better. Okay guys, that's the episode for this week. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I tried to make it a bit more faster paced. Let me know what you think of the format change. As always guys, put your thoughts below. I always like engaging with you guys, hear your thoughts on what we've covered, what I should have covered. If you think I got something wrong, I'd love to hear it. Wherever you are, I hope you're staying safe and staying sane. See you next time on China Update.